Let me read to you a passage from the 7th chapter of St. Mark's Gospel, verses 31 to 37. It's the Gospel for Friday of the 5th week in Ordinary Time. St. Mark writes, "Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly speak, and they begged him to place his hand on the man. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spat and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, 'Ephphatha,' which means, 'be opened.' At this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. 'He has done all things well,' they said. 'He even makes the deaf hear and the mutes speak.'" That's from Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to 37. What does it suggest to us? Well, it tells us something of the ways of God. In the vicinity of Tyre, our Lord had striven to spend a little time in solitude with his disciples, but it did not happen. He was found out and was successfully badgered by the pagan Syrophoenician woman to heal her daughter of some demonic infestation. Doubtlessly, just as the woman had discovered her benefactor, so she proceeded to discover him to others. Our Lord, with his heart full of love and compassion, moved on circuitously to the Decapolis region. That's from the Decapolis refers to the 10 cities of that area. The Decapolis settlements were centres of Greek and Roman culture in an area that was otherwise Semitic. With the exception of Damascus, the region of the Decapolis was located roughly in modern-day Jordan. We're not told how long our Lord stayed there, perhaps only very briefly, and as with Tyre, it was largely a Gentile area. But again, here too, he was prevailed upon to heal. We read that some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly speak, and they begged him to place his hand on the man. The petitioners certainly had faith. All they required of him was that he touch the man with his hand. That was all that was necessary. But, intriguingly, we notice that our Lord does not do this. With the importunate Canaanite woman, our Lord simply says his word, and the woman went back to her home, calmed with absolute assurance about her suffering daughter. But here, he does not do this. Despite their request for a simple touch of the hand, there is a most unusual ritual, we might say, an elaborate procedure which constitutes a bit of a mystery. We read that after he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears, then he spat and touched on the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means, "be opened." Scholars make various suggestions as to the reason for this unusual course. Perhaps it provided a type for our Lord's action in the future sacramental life and practice of the Church, and so forth. But Christ himself does not say. For his reasons and his reasons alone, this is the way he chose to do it. We are at the very least reminded by this event that the ways of God are varied and often inscrutable. For instance, the cause for the beatification of one recently declared venerable by the Church is in process. The Church includes among her requirements a sign from God in the form of a miracle due to that person's intercession. Let's take that scenario. An obscure sick person somewhere in the world prays with fervour to the one declared venerable, and a striking miracle occurs which is ratified by the doctors as utterly beyond natural causes. The answer to prayer has come rapidly. But another person prays for healing, asking the intercession of a different person declared venerable by the church, whose cause is also proceeding. But no answer comes immediately. The prayers must be kept up for a long time, in faith and hope. Why is God doing things in this complicated and seemingly unnecessary way? We do not know. But we are reminded of the roundabout course our Lord mysteriously followed in today's gospel healing. Such are the ways of God. Such is the divine will, and God must know best. Ours it is to submit to his will. Our gospel passage presents us with another detail of this order. Having healed the deaf and almost dumb man, our Lord told his friends not to tell anyone. The Greek indicates a command, a charge. Why did he do this? After all, on various occasions, even with his disciples, and certainly with the religious leaders, he would appeal to the works that he was doing, his miracles, as a witness to the truth of his claims. Of course, we can easily conjecture as to the reason for his prohibition, and various scholars give their suggestions. But the reason is not given in the text, and perhaps our Lord himself did not give his reasons to his disciples nor to anyone else for this prohibition. The fact is that it was not necessary to know our Lord's reasons. Presumably, though, our Lord's reasons were important and were part and parcel of God's plan of salvation. But what happened? His insistent order was ignored. We read that the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. The opposite was done. They did precisely the opposite of what our Lord willed. God has his ways. Such is the divine will, and God must know best. It is not necessary that we see the reason why God does what he does, but what is most necessary is obedience to his will. We must be very careful to do God's will in seemingly unimportant things. If it be God's will, no matter how small the issue, our disobedience will be an offense against God, and our obedience will be pleasing to him. We must assume that the attainment of God's plan for us and for others will depend on our obeying God in the small details of life, because life is mainly made up of small details. In any case, it is God who asks it,